Like many industries that result in fame and fortune, professional wrestling can also lead to its stars having to fight their fair share of demons. And I'm not talking about Finn Balor, Dale Torborg, or Kane here either. No, I am talking about personal demons that manifest themselves in the form of, more often than not, substance abuse issues. Yes, the fame and fortune can certainly lead to unfortunate indulgences like drugs and alcohol. Obviously, the manic schedule and the fact that, they're getting slammed on wood and kicked in the head for a living can also lead to a dependency on things like pain medication. It's an unsavory side of the business, and one that thankfully seems to be less and less prevalent as time goes on, and can touch everyone from the lowliest jobber to the world champion. Frequently, the really bad cases tend to lead directly to an obituary, but sometimes wrestlers are able to kick out at 2, conquer their demons, and come back stronger. And that is something that should be celebrated with as much enthusiasm as a Royal Rumble win or a WrestleMania main event. Well, besides that one. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestlers who fought their demons and came back stronger. Join us. Number 10, Shawn Michaels. There's no questioning that Shawn Michaels is one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of boots, or throw on a pair of mirror-covered chaps for that matter. But during his 90s heyday, he could be more than a bit of a handful. For as talented as the Heartbreak Kid was inside the ring, he was just as self-destructive outside of it, popping pills and doing other nefarious things with absolute glee. Things got even worse when Michaels was forced to retire from active competition after suffering a devastating back injury in 1998. Now, without wrestling to fulfill him, he sank deeper into his addictions, alienating his closest friends and almost burning his bridge with WWE, who was still paying him to sit at home in the process. The tipping point for Michaels came when he realized that his then 2-year-old son Cameron was starting to recognize when his dad wasn't quite with it after the toddler had found him passed out on the sofa one day. The next day, HBK proclaimed that he would never take pills or drink alcohol again for the sake of his children. And he didn't, kicking the habits and remaining sober thanks in large part to finding his faith and becoming a born-again Christian. After he got cleaned up, he of course returned to WWE for the second act in his career. Number 9, Dustin Rhodes. Dustin Goldust Rhodes may be one of the most iconic WWE stars ever, belong to a famous wrestling family, and be respected throughout the business, but he, like so many others, were not immune to substance abuse issues. According to Rhodes, his problems got really bad when he had left WWE and was working for TNA in the mid-2000s. Combining pain pills with booze and other drugs, the natural would spend whatever time he didn't have to be working for Dixie Carter or doing some indie show blitzed out of his mind. At one point, the bizarre one was taking 40 pills a day, along with everything else, and you could just see his deterioration on screen, especially during the regrettable Black Rain days. After one particularly brutal 3-day binge, Rhodes realized that he had hit rock bottom and needed help. Stumbling up a hill at 4:30 a.m. one rainy morning in order to get cell phone reception, Dustin called his father Dusty and let him know just how bad things were. The next day, Rhodes was booked into WWE-sponsored rehab, staying for 30 days. He has now been drug and alcohol-free since May 20th, 2008. After kicking the habits, he returned to WWE for a long run and now wrestles and acts as a coach for AEW. Number 8, Kurt Angle. Though Kurt Angle picked up the business about as quick as anyone in history and rose to the top of WWE with unprecedented speed, when he signed with the company, he was already damaged goods. Angle, you might have heard, broke his freaking neck in the run-up to the 1996 Olympic Games, didn't stop him winning the gold, mind you, and was still feeling the effects when he wrestled for Vince McMahon. The punishing schedule and Kurt's full-on style resulted in more broken necks and other injuries and inevitably led him to self-medicating. By 2006, the wrestling machine was falling apart and was gobbling down the pills and other things, causing his behavior to become increasingly erratic and leading directly to his release. He showed up in TNA soon after, where the lighter schedule gave his battered body a rest, but Kurt's issues did not subside. He was arrested in 2009, twice in 2011, and once again in 2013, all for driving while intoxicated. After the last DUI, Angle went to rehab, paid for by WWE, and has been clean since. While Angle's world-class performances never let on that he was battling addiction, those close to the situation know just how close he was to losing his life. From now on, Kurt is strictly on the milk during nights out. Number 7, William Regal. One of the most dependable performers in the business became anything but in the mid to late 90s thanks to his dependence on pain pills, sleeping meds, booze, and a then legal dietary supplement called Renutrient that gave a high similar to GHB. His issues really started after he injured his knee while on a tour of Japan and completely spiraled from there. One low point from this period was Regal unknowingly urinating on a flight attendant while on a trip back from Tokyo to Detroit and waking up in a jail in Alaska with no idea how he got there. He was fired by WCW and immediately hired by WWE, who didn't know the extent of his issues, but oh boy, they soon found out. The real man's man wasn't on our screens long before he was let go, and he was right back to WCW, who also mistakenly believed that Regal had sorted himself out. He hadn't, and was constantly relapsing and finding new ways to hit rock bottom. It's all covered in harrowing detail in his autobiography, Walking a Golden Mile, a book that some of his friends were surprised that he was even alive to write. Once Regal managed to get clean, he turned his life and career around and has been with WWE in various significant roles for over 2 decades now. Number 6, Marc Mero. Marc Mero had a truly marvelous life. Big fat contract with WWE, married to his Playboy cover star wife, who he also got to work with, a great relationship with his family, the works. And then one day, he suddenly had nothing. His mother, father, and brother had all passed away in short succession, and Sable had left him while his mainstream wrestling career was over. He was also hopelessly addicted to drugs and alcohol, having nearly died of an overdose on 3 separate occasions. Sitting under a Cocoa Beach, Florida pier on Christmas Day, he considered ending it all. Thankfully, he reconsidered, reevaluated his life, and decided to seek help. The former Intercontinental Champion endeavored to get clean and completely turned his life around thanks to his sobriety and rediscovering his faith. Since then, Mero has been an advocate for cleaning up the wrestling business, inspired to take up the cause after losing so many of his friends and co-workers way before their time. He also began a new career as a motivational speaker, touring schools and colleges around the United States and speaking to students about his experiences in a bid to prevent them from going down a similar path. Number 5, Jake Roberts. For a long time, Jake Roberts looked a lock to become the next wrestling statistic. Abusing drugs and alcohol, and with his personal and professional life in tatters, Roberts was a sad sight whenever he showed up. The tales of his indiscretions are numerous and his self-destructive lifestyle unparalleled. He had publicly disgraced himself many times, including at the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view and while on a disastrous tour of the UK for All-Star Wrestling. Realizing that he had a serious problem, the Snake took advantage of WWE's sponsored rehab program in 2007 and was seemingly doing well, but relapsed. Moving in with Diamond Dallas Page in 2012, Roberts committed himself to getting better and turning his life around. Incredibly, he went from being in very poor health and overweight to looking years younger and regaining flexibility he had once thought lost. Jake's road to sobriety was captured in the warts and all documentary The Resurrection of Jake the Snake. Since then, Roberts has steadied the course and has been rewarded for his good behavior, first with a WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2014 and more recently with a job as a manager and coach for AEW. Number 4, the Hardy Boyz. When the Hardys first rose to prominence in the late 90s, they were teetotalers. Young and not yet tainted by the business, Matt and Jeff didn't even drink beer, which got them some heat with the likes of, well, you can guess, Bradshaw. However, years of being on the road and wrestling a punishing style took their toll, and soon enough, both men began to experiment with things to help them cope with the schedule and wear and tear. The charismatic Enigma was the first to fall by the wayside, failing 2 drugs tests before being fired in 2003 after refusing to attend rehab. His issues only worsened over the years, the nadir being when he was arrested on possession charges in 2009 after the feds raided his house, leading to a stint in jail and a hefty fine after he pled guilty. Matt, on the other hand, picked up the bad habits later than his younger brother, but his issues were no less serious. His erratic public behavior sounding alarm bells for those who realized what was going on, and also being a reason for his WWE release. Thankfully, both managed to come through it and are still going strong as members of the WWE and AEW rosters, and are now family men with young children, though Jeff has admitted that his sobriety is still an ongoing struggle. Number 3, Randy Orton. Young Randy Orton had absolutely everything going for him. In his early 20s, in great shape, getting a push, having the time of his life. It was all gravy as far as his career was concerned, but Orton had a lot of maturing to do. He misbehaved behind the scenes and caused an untold number of headaches for WWE management as well as his co-workers, many of whom were quickly running out of patience for the legend killer. He would frequently target and harass new members of the locker room and was a menace to the public too, destroying his fair share of hotel rooms and causing other mayhem on the road. Things were particularly bleak in the mid-2000s, and Randy was suspended twice for violating the WWE wellness policy. It was during this period that Orton had overdosed on pain medication, resulting in hospitalization. Orton fell foul of the wellness policy again in 2012, though had a strike removed from his name after successfully attending rehab in 2016. Since then, the Viper has been a reformed character and has grown up a lot. No longer interested in pulling pranks or indulging in his vices, Orton is more comfortable playing video games or hanging out with his family during downtime. Number 2, Lex Luger. Lex Luger went from being a wrestling champion with the body of an Adonis to sitting in a prison cell, addicted to drugs and his reputation in ruins. The extent of the total package's problems only really came out once he had left the spotlight. In the spring of 2003, a couple of years after the sale of WCW, Luger was living in Georgia with his girlfriend Elizabeth Hewlett, the former wife and manager of Randy Savage, who was known as Miss Elizabeth. In a period of just a few weeks, Lex was involved in a domestic dispute with her and was then given a DUI. Then, tragically, Elizabeth died of an accidental drug overdose in the residence the two shared, the subsequent police search uncovering Luger's massive stash of pain pills, steroids, and other drugs. He was eventually fined and put on probation, but later spent time in jail after being removed from a flight along with Buff Bagwell and Scott Steiner for violating his probation. His life continued to get out of control when he suffered a spinal stroke in 2009. Now confined to a wheelchair and his career over, Lex became a born-again Christian, which he credits for saving his life, and he now spends his free time helping others and working with schools and churches. Number 1, Scott Hall. Scott Hall had a very, very good Hall of Fame-worthy wrestling career stuffed with highlights. But sadly, his outside-the-ring exploits often overshadowed all of the good work he did inside the squared circle. Hall's issues became public knowledge in the late 90s and were actually incorporated into WCW storylines in a pretty tactless move from the company. Razor's bad times continued when he went to WWE in 2002, only lasting a couple of months before being released due to his unruly behavior and unreliability. From there, Hall entered a cycle of repeated arrests and trips to rehab, but nothing seemed to stick, and things got so bleak that best friend Kevin Nash feared that he may end up taking his own life. His health failing and his wrestling days over, it took divine intervention from wrestling's guardian angel, DDP, to help straighten him out and get his health and spirit back. Fortunately, it worked, and Hall has been on the up ever since, becoming a 2-time WWE Hall of Fame inductee and, crucially, staying well clear of the drunk tank. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do, and Scott Hall is living proof that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.